Like imagine a kid coming home, mom, I'm struggling with this maths equation, and the mother's like, well, I've never done maths, I can't help you. So what kind of products can we do to help facilitate those kind of problems that plugs into everything that we've spoken about?
We need to build on this stuff and make sure the next generation is set up to go further than what we did. And one of the ways we do that is through education. So I think reinforced learning in that space is definitely key. The big problem is, how do you pay for that?
Good morning, Renier. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Hey, Bobby, good and you?
Yeah, good. Always lots to talk about. Quite curious to see how today's conversation goes on how would you build it, you know,
Yeah.
changing the theme. And today we've decided we're going to talk about STEM. So Renier, would you like to just kick us off by explaining in your words, what is STEM? Why is it important to understand?
Yeah, so STEM is basically just an acronym for subjects that are really important in the world that we're currently living in, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. And I really got onto the topic. We were researching developers, software developers, and where they are in the world for our newsletter, the open letter. And one of the things we found, which a lot of people know, is there's quite a lot of software developers in India. In fact, the amount of software developers in India surpassed that of the United States this year. So they estimated that there are about 5.2 million software developers in India. And I'm like, that's quite interesting. Let's have a look at how many there are in Africa. And we found that it's almost a tenth of that. So I think it's at 600,000 or 650 or something like that. But if you look at population size, the population of Africa is about the same as India. So somewhere South Africa fell behind. And if you dig into it a bit, it's 20 years ago, the Indian government made an effort to say, even if our schools are dysfunctional, let's just try and promote STEM subjects. Let's just try and develop a passion and a love for it, together with fostering a work ethic. And that work ethic, together with a passion for science, just brought about this generation of Indian youth that are, passionate about these subjects, and a lot of them have ended up in software development. Now, what's fascinating is a lot of us already know that both Microsoft and Alphabet, Google, are led by gentlemen from Indian origin. But, there are 26 companies on the S&P 500 that are being led by people from Indian origin. So they've really rose up globally in the tech ranks and across the world. Not only in India, 5.2 million, it's probably another million in America. So, Indian developers and scientists all over the world making massive changes. And it shows in the numbers. India, now there's an estimated 102 unicorns that came from India, which is tech companies that are worth more than $1 billion. Where in Africa, I think we're at 5 now. Also, when it comes to investment, there was 28 billion invested into tech startups in 2022 in India, estimated, and Africa is estimated, around 5 to 6 billion. So, it's a substantial difference. So a lot of times we talk about how are we going to solve the growth challenges in Africa, and how are we, going to get more investment into Africa, or how are we going to get more startups going? Well, perhaps the answer lies in getting more scientists and software developers. And unfortunately, that is something that's probably going to take a generation to get going if we start now. And that's why I think the conversation around STEM subjects and people building in the space to promote it really, I think, is building along the lines of the future of Africa.
Yeah, no, I cannot agree with you more. And I think education is such a soft spot because we know the history that South Africa kind of has, what did and didn't do, Bantu education, all of that kind of put us on the back foot. And and I think what the government tried to do since 1994, and we were just talking about it offline, is that 20% of the national government's budget is spent on education. So they've kind of got their priorities in terms of financial, but like I don't want to dive into where that money's going. Like honestly, I'd just freak me out. But the point is that they understand that there is an importance on education and gap and bring them in. Unfortunately, we're not seeing the results. And you're also just talking about the unfortunate situations that are constantly plaguing our universities at the moment. WITS is going through its own protests again, and it's a financial problem. They need more funds for their studies and accommodation. So we're in a tough spot here because we really do need to focus on. And it was the SRC. I was watching an interview with the SRC chairman of WITS And he was talking about, he was in a computer science class with a first year student last year. And this guy came from whichever town or city that he came from, and he barely knew how to switch on a computer. He barely knew how to use it, but he needed it for his studies. So there's like this root problem of not being able to teach enough people. Where's the teachers that are actually helping these kids learn the basics of technology, science, maths, and the rest? So it's a lot of work there.
And I think, there's a lot of legacy things that makes it hard, right? And I was at a talk that Robert Paddock from Valencia Institute gave, and he was speaking about, how it's really hard to get great STEM teachers to relocate to areas where they need it most, right? And it's not because they're not willing to join the cause. It's just sometimes it's not practical. It's not safe for them to travel into some of these areas, and those are areas that probably need it the most. So there's some social issues that we need to figure out in terms of making that happen. What they're doing is quite interesting, right? So they're saying, look, can we run an old physical school? They're piloting this project where can we run like an old school model where people go to a school, but this school doesn't have a teacher in class. The teacher is online.
Yes.
So that way you can set up a school in Kailicha or whichever other rural area, but you can have a teacher from Harvard doing a lecture from the other side of the world.
Amazing.
If you can make that work, then perhaps we can sort that specific issue out.
Yeah.
But one thing is for sure, I think, Bobby, the model we've been trying, there's areas where it's worked better than others, but I think there's two parts to it. The first part is, functioning schools. Now, the old Model C schools, a lot of them are still really good schools, and they spread out throughout the country. Unfortunately, not in some of the areas where they need it most, but those schools, generally still do a good job. The second part is, I think, what all schools are missing, and this is where the private education part and the startup space becomes interesting, is the approach to education. The approach in these Model C schools are still, a bit old, and they're still kind of preparing people for, one would say, an old world. And I'm not an education expert. I've got children in school, and the school is amazing. But I'd also love to see them getting prepared more for some of the things that they'll be facing in the future.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it becomes tricky. Like, where's government's role in that? Is it something that private should play a bigger role in? Like, how should that play out?
No, you touched on so many important parts there, and I agree. And I think that's where this conversation of today, I would like to kind of steer it, is the role that kind of startups and the private sector is playing in all of this, understanding that. And I think that we all agree, and it's not a South African problem on this old way of schooling, right? Like, you sit in a classroom with 30 people, the teacher shouts at you and tells you what to do, you do your homework, you come back, and that's kind of it. There's this new way and a new kind of philosophy around teaching, and it's these private schools, it's these startups. And I love the example of being able to get taught by a Stanford lecturer here in South Africa. I mean, it's possible now, and just wanted to touch, it's an infrastructure thing, right? If you've got Wi-Fi, you've got good internet, you can do that. And that's another problem that we need to kind of solve. But there's some great startups, and I've had them on my podcast in the past, and they're talking about exactly that, what you just mentioned. It's kind of, how do we change the approach to learning? And I can give some examples. First of all, there's Joel Kaplan from Hybrid School. He's got Think International. Now I'm botching it now while we're doing Thought Hybrid International School. That's it. Fascinating conversation with him about how he's kind of giving children problems to solve instead of giving them work to do. There's down the road from where I live, there's the Relum School. They've only had a primary section. They're busy, literally as we speak. The bricks are going up for the high school section of this, where they teach robotics, and they teach like kind of that fourth industrial revolution kind of like subjects for these kids. There's Mindjoy, which we've already had we've spoken about on the podcast, you've had in your newsletter, and they're all kind of thinking about, there is this opportunity out there, how can we approach it? And like you said, like, you don't want to botch a kid's education, so how can we help?
That's the problem, right? It's like, I mean, we can't rip out the system and go, let's try something new. This isn't a digital product where if you make a mistake, you can just go, oh, sorry, customers, here's your money back.
Yeah.
Like, we can give parents their money back, but we can never reverse time and go back, okay, the 5 years that we taught them in a specific way, we're going to go back and redo it. And I think that's why education system globally, this isn't uniquely South African, but globally has been such a complex thing to change. You cannot simply just roll it out and go, okay, we want to pilot something completely brand new. We think it's going to make sense to do it this way, right? And you can do that, but the reality is you'll only know the impact 5 to 10 years down the line, because when they hit the workplace, then you'll see what you've done. Because ultimately, that's one of the core objectives of schooling system, right? Is preparing people for the workplace.
Exactly.
Now, let's be honest, with a matric in South Africa, there's not a lot that you prepared for in the workplace. Like, respectfully, like, I mean, there are definitely jobs, but it's maybe 5 to 10% of jobs out there are jobs that simply require a matric. So that's why we have these protests at FITS. People are going, I've got matric, but there's nothing I can do with that.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't find a job. So now I need to go and pay another 100,000 Rand a year plus. I don't know what these tuition fees cost, but I'm assuming with inflation, from the last time I checked, that's where we kind of add, if you include accommodation and food at normally things in these towns are expensive, right? Living in Stellenbosch and paying for everything here and education, it's quite expensive. So now you're going, cool, it's an extra 100K a year, and that's another 4 years of that, and only then you have a chance of getting a job. It's not even a guarantee. So if you just look at that, one has to ask the question and go, how do we change this and say, okay, but we can prepare people to, out of school, launch into a career, be it an entrepreneur, be it a software developer, be it something completely different, something in technology. And I love the thought about people solving problems, and I've experienced this in my own life, right? So I wanted to get into blockchain, right? Understand what this thing is about. So I read you start with Satoshi, right? Who doesn't start with Satoshi's paper? So I started there, read up on what's this Bitcoin thing, kind of get it, and then the Ethereum paper, which is like the higher grade version of that. But you don't really get it, right?
Yeah.
When you go, let's put some money into this stuff and see if we can make more money with it. Now I've got a problem to solve. Right, so you start looking into these DeFi projects, and all of a sudden you go, no, I invested in this thing. Now I really need to understand how this works and what's happening. And that's when I really started to learn, okay, this is what blockchain is about, right? So it's funny because the technology and the making the money part, those things are independent in the blockchain space. They're not the same thing. But because I had a problem to solve, which was I tried to make a bit of money with it, immediately it forced me to learn the technology, because I felt like that would be a tool to help me get an edge in this space. Right. And I think the same thing applies when we solve any problem. Like if you want to solve something or learn something, get a problem to solve, and even better yet, make it so that if you don't solve that problem, you end up losing money. So you're playing a bit on that loss aversion thing. And then all of a sudden you learn a lot of things which you never thought you would learn. And I think that's really useful. So I love that idea of solving problems, getting into stuff that you're passionate about and exploring it. The problem is, Bobby, how do you scale that? How do you, with each child having different interests and different things that they're passionate about, different things that problems they want to solve, how do you do that in a school with 1,000 people?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So I have another story, which is from that Relum school that I mentioned. You know what they did? They had robots. They build these robotics, these little machines, whatever. They had them on the ground, and the kids, they just had them on display. And then they would have like a piece of something. I can't remember what it was, like a magnet. And as they walk past, they could wave this magnet, and the robot would respond to them. And what it was doing was triggering this curiosity for the kids to say, wow, how did I get it to do that for me? And then so it's like sparking interest. Okay, so how did it know that I needed it to do that? And kind of building that up. And that's kind of talking to the problem. Like, how can I influence making that robot do what I want it to do, right? So there's the problem. I'm trying to solve it in a different way. And what else can I do with it? Now, going to your question, how do you scale it? I mean, that's great. Like, it's a very important question. And there's another shout out to Matthew Henschel and his portfolio of companies. He's got a company called Code for Kids, and it's about actually enabling teachers to be able to teach code for kids. I mean, talking to him also, and it's like, how can we distribute these teachers or these facilitators around it? And I guess online is the best way to scale it, but what are you missing out on, all the kind of human element to like working together and collaborating when you only can, the scale
Yeah.
options are only online.
Yeah, I think technology is definitely the way to do it, right? But it's always going to be a hybrid, because there's a part that will always be kind of like needs human intervention and needs someone to apply a bit of empathy and a softer angle to it. But yeah, I think something that it sparks an idea for me in terms of technology, and I don't know exactly how this would apply to education, but there's a global fitness brand called F45, and they've got some studios in South Africa as well. Mark Wahlberg supported it. They did a listing, the stock went sky high, and then it went back to the ground. Anyway, but what they did is they took the best of CrossFit. So I know everybody knows a CrossFitter. You've been at a braai. And he's pitched you his philosophy around CrossFit. But what they did is they took functional training and they brought it into an environment that really scales. So they've got these screens in front of the studio, and these screens loop the exercises you do at specific stations, and then I've got one central timer that makes you move around these screens. Now, what's incredible, this is the scale story, they can do up to some classes, 30 to 40 people in a class, but they only need 2 or 3 trainers to actually facilitate 30 to 40 people training, right? Exactly. Because the exercises, one, have been simplified, and two, have been presented in a nice way on these screens in front of your station. The chances of you actually doing those exercises wrong and getting injured is substantially lower. So these trainers walk around, encourage people, and whenever someone does form's not great, they'll correct it. But what was great is now all of a sudden your ratio of personal trainer to people training is 2 to 40. Where in the past it was 2 to 3 or 2 to 4, in a CrossFit class they pushed it to 10, but then it gets a bit risky, So that's a beautiful example of using technology to scale. So if you think about that model and go, how do we bring that model into the classroom? Well, the problem is the classroom is going to be much more dynamic than a studio where everybody does exactly the same exercise. But I think that's where AI can start playing a very interesting role, right? AI can probably, bridge the gap from where they are to just to that point before a teacher needs to get in. Because at the moment, you might have 10 kids in a class sitting and all of them need attention right now. If AI can just extend the engagement time of the pupil and take them on a learning journey, to a point where a teacher can jump in, I think this becomes really interesting. Yeah. And what I found interesting is I've got a friend, Alvon, he's one of the contributors in our newsletter, and he's got a 10-year-old son that does homeschooling. And he told his son one morning when they had to do history work, he told him, well, go onto ChatGPT and ask him some questions. Okay? So I think he went into American Lincoln. He was chatting to Lincoln, asking him all kinds of questions around why he made certain decisions or why certain things happened. And ChatGPT acted like he was Lincoln, President Lincoln. And this child came away that day telling his father, like, this is the most I've learned about history ever. Like, wow. And he could recall every single thing he learned because he could ask what he wanted to ask. It wasn't, this is what Lincoln did, this is why he did it. And this kid was looking at it going, well, there's other things about the story which I find interesting. Let me ask a very specific question. And that sparked, more interest into other things, which got him on this journey of learning about American history and the presidents and, the American Constitution, which is probably a much more useful way to do it than going, here's the story, learn it by heart. I had history at school. You would memorize that stuff, right? You would those long form questions, you'd know exactly how to answer them. And it was so stupid because if there was the approach should have been much more, understanding the concepts and the what is behind it in order to formulate your own opinion. That would have probably been a better way to approach it. Yet the schooling system just said, no, it's fine if you just memorize it and
exactly.
And decide it. Even that was also 20 years ago, maybe longer. So maybe it changed a bit since then.
Yeah, I think the word that keeps coming into my head as we're talking is curiosity, because I love that, right? Fueling curiosity is kind of the key for me. So when I talk about the robotic story at the school, you're kind of triggering the curiosity, and then getting the child or the children or the students to go and use that curiosity to go and find the results. And I agree with you with AI, there's an opportunity there. For me, the problem with it is it focuses mostly on the what. So what did Lincoln do, whatever it is like that. The question comes in, how can you execute on what the AI is telling you. And I think that's where the teacher steps in, like you said. So, like now learning, for example, I need to create an API on Firebase or something like that. It will tell you how to do it. It's telling you what you need to do, but it's about how you go and take that information and implement it and create that API. Or if you go and figure out how to do that mathematical equation or solving a world problem, like maybe a revenue model or something like that, using something that the AI kind of guided you to understand. And I think that's where the key, when we talk about AI, is like how to empower the curiosity, like the kids, to do stuff through that curiosity, that they're kind of finding these new ways of learning and then giving them that opportunity to go and do it.
Look, and I think a big challenge, and this is something that I have a big issue with, is just how ChatGPT presents certain facts or certain things that aren't facts as facts in a completely convincing way. So I think, if anything, that needs to improve, and we need to get that sorted out. But it's going to be interesting to see how AI is changing the education space. I mean, to your point, like how do we teach kids to use this as a tool instead of getting them to replace their own thinking with that thing? And I think it will evolve, right? I mean, this notion to think that humans will stop thinking somehow and just be, stupid and let robots do everything. I mean, come on, we've seen those waves multiple times with new introduction of new technology. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
So, but we need to figure out how to bring this into education.
So if we had like we're trying to do with the show, is like, how would you build it? And I think for me, it's about how do you find the teachers? Well, I think teachers become more of a facilitator, because the world and the internet and everything has the information. So it's not about understanding the what, it's about how do you facilitate the learning journey. And that's what I really loved about talking to Gabby from Mindjoy, because what she's trying to do is just to facilitate the kids' learning. And I think that's, you become more of a facilitator than the actual kind of teaching. This is what you have to learn if you want to pass the exam. Because that, I mean, if I think about how many times a teacher told me, if you want to pass the exam, you have to know this. Rather than, if you want to pass, you need to be able to solve this.
I think it's once again, it's like, how do you get in there, right? So on the one hand, you have government employees, which are teachers, and the headmasters of these schools, and they on the one hand, I've met so many teachers that are so passionate about helping kids make progress and wonderful people. It's definitely a calling for them, right? But they're confronted with this thing. On the other hand, they also have a responsibility towards an employer to do certain things, right? So how do you get into a public school? I think one thing that one can consider is say, okay, how do you convince them of this philosophy of these new kind of things that kids need to learn, and how we can help them navigate these things, and start introducing it as an extramural kind of class after school, and get some kids involved and pilot some stuff in that space, right? So that's kind of a way which I think could be very interesting, because now you're saying, okay, well, we're not ripping out the carpet and building an entire new school, which I have a lot of respect for people that are doing that. But you can start it a bit more organic, right? So you say, okay, how do we get a little pilot environment going, right? Yes. And I think that's always the most important thing when we build anything, is like, how do you build certain things and get people to test it and get some feedback. And you can do that in such an environment, right? And through that, I think one can build up the learnings, both the learnings, the process, and most importantly, the confidence to actually evolve that into saying, okay, now we're happy to go and build a school that pulls out kids out of a different environment where they're getting schooled into our environment, which is more STEM focused. But I think, one, you need a passion for it. Two, you need to spend some time in that space. But I also have seen people that have been teachers for years. They understand as well, and they go, cool, I think there's a different way of doing this. Let's take the plunge and build something else. I think something that is interesting, by the way, that kind of speaks to this is there's been a massive shift. Obviously, when COVID hit, people's kids were at home doing school, and they're like, what? I'm just going to continue with this homeschooling thing. And that lasted about 6 months. And then people realized, okay, wait, homeschooling is...
Isn't that UCT online school that kind of tried to, forge away, and that didn't work out? during that time?
Yeah, and look, it's hard, right? And I mean, if we're honest about it, not all of there's a reason why some people are qualified teachers and other people are doing other jobs, right?
Yeah.
And I think people learned that the hard way. And a lot of these kids, unfortunately, heading back to school, and now they have to, redo the year that they missed, right?
Sure.
And it's a missed year for them to catch up now. So it's not that easy. So we need to figure out, how do we pilot things? How do we build the confidence? How do we measure? How do we track? So how do you measure? I think in education, one of the challenges is you're probably going to have to, there's a bit of a delayed measurement. It's not like a digital product where you go, cool, I've got immediate feedback here from users using it. There's a delay. At least the delay is at the end of the year. They need to do some kind of assessment, and you need to see if that was a good outcome or not. So it's a really complex space to pilot things in. It's a really complex space to get tangible feedback. The feedback loops are long. But if you base it on sound philosophy around how teaching and discovering new things and learning things work, then obviously you're closer to that. And that's why I love what the guys at Beeline is doing. Beeline is a platform that uses modern teaching methods to help people learn all kinds of things, right? So it's not only school. There's some other cool, interesting topics on the platform as well. It's got a bit of a Duolingo feel to it.
Okay.
But, instead of going, learning things they put on the platform, people can create their own courses. And these courses then, give prompts to people that are participating in the course to reinforce learning, right? So similarly, if you've done Duolingo, you'll see them checking the same things you've learned, but in a different way a few days after you've learned that thing. So it's this concept of reinforced learning, constantly prompting, constantly bringing things to the fore, gamifying it, making it problems that you need to solve.
You touched on something
and I thought
else.
that's quite cool.
Yeah. So there's two things, and I love it, and it's quite interesting. And that's again like talking about the Beelines of the world, the Mindjoys, and all of that are kind of playing in the space. Just want to touch on something that you spoke about, extramural. And I think if we talk again about just bringing it back to how would you do it, there's this opportunity to partner with current schools and say, give us an hour after school. So if school finishes at 2 p.m., give us the 2 till 3 p.m. slot before the sport starts. And we want to introduce them to Beeline or Mindjoy or this AI tool or, Code for Kids, all these kind of startups we're doing, and kind of experimenting to see what would work. So getting the startups to actually plug into these schools and experiment with a different way of teaching that could kind of maybe scale that way. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But see, here's the thing, and this is where we need people in the education space to be a bit of, to hustle a bit, right? If you build a digital product and you need your first customer, it's also a hustle. Like you need to ask them. You need to ask 1,000 people to get 10 people to go, okay, I'll maybe give it a shot, and 2 or 3 might end up using it. Okay. And that might sound like an extreme case, but in many cases that's exaggerating. Like it's sometimes even harder than that. So you have to do what you need to do to get the right kind of pilots going. So the question really becomes is like, what is a good pilot, right? What kind of school do you want to test this in? Now, I think there's different products and projects in different spaces running, but I think if these education people really hustle and go to the headmasters and convince them. In sales, there's this thing that says a quick no is better than a no answer, right? Because if you get a no, at least you know where you stand, right?
Yeah.
So if you pitch the solution to a headmaster and they go, I don't like this, or no, not for us now. Well, at least you can get some feedback and you can understand how you can pivot your offering and come back and actually try something else. So let's get those solutions in schools. We're talking about a 2 to 3 extramural. It could also replace the computer class in primary schools. Like the computer class in primary schools is, in the lower grades, it's not coding. It's them playing around in, the equivalent of what today would be Microsoft Paint, which is awesome. I'm loving the fact that they're teaching kids how to use a computer mouse and, what you could do with this stuff. And my kids are loving it. But, that class could easily be replaced by someone piloting some new way of introducing kids to technology.
Exactly.
And I think the impact would be sparking curiosity for those kids to go, you know what, this guy brought a drone to class and he showed how he took pictures of things, and and it's like, wow, Dad, can we get a drone?
There we go.
I want to take pictures of cool things and sell it on the internet. Like,
Yeah, whatever it
there's
is
stuff.
that you need to do. I agree. And I think a point that I want to touch on now next is what you were talking about just before I made that point, which is reinforced learning and the gamification, because you want to gamify that reinforced learning. So you kind of want to incentivize the teachings of things. So talking about maths, talk about like how do you gamify learning maths? You know, like you start at this level, prompt. You're at this level, well done. Now you can solve these kind of problems, prompt. Now you're at this level. And I think that's quite an interesting way. We need to think of this behavioral science behind getting kids excited about learning, turning it into a game, because we all know most kids are playing games on their phones and spending most of their time using, playing different kinds of games they shouldn't maybe not be doing, and rather gamifying and making learning fun through a gamification kind of mechanism.
And it's interesting. I mean, I'm confronted with this. I've got an 8-year-old daughter, and she's really smart. But they're busy developing their language and math skills, right? So they've got these. I don't know what it's called in English, but it's woordsomme. Where they give him like a sentence to go, you have a party, you invite 15 friends, only 13 can come, how many didn't come? Those kind of things. And a lot of it is just practice, right? Understanding the different angles of how this could get worded in order to create this math equation in order to solve it, right? She can do the math, but now you're introducing language with it and comprehension, so you need to understand the different shapes that this thing can come in, right? So it's all practice. So I'm going, where can I get more of these things to practice? So you go online, and now you have to go and Snaplify, bless their souls. They had an ebook that I could buy for $25 that has like 50 of these things in, and I could print it out, and she could practice that a bit. But I'm thinking, why isn't this a push notification that gets to the tablet that she sometimes uses to watch, some shows on? Where she can just get this prompt and do a quick one, and then the thing in time can learn which ones is she struggling with, and then reprompt those ones back and make sure she gets good at those ones.
Exactly.
Because I'm like, this is something that can easily fit into that environment, because she actually enjoys doing them and she actually enjoys getting them right. But it's not a game anyway. Like, it's not if it's not done at school or not done with me in the evening, then it just doesn't happen. And this reinforced learning, I think, can play a really awesome role in that space. Is saying, okay, cool. How do we bridge the gap here for parents? Like, if kids are struggling with specific things, like how do we plug in a topic and do some reinforced learning to help them get that right? Because a lot of it is practice. I remember math at university. It was like, you have to do those things 50 million times. And you have to understand it. There's a part that is understanding, but the other part of understanding actually develops as you figure out how to do it. And you literally sit and work out old papers and do old things, because you have to learn how to think in a way to solve those things. And I think that reinforced learning is specifically also what I've realized is in households where the parents aren't that equipped or don't have the time to actually help with the reinforced learning. That is where it's absolutely crucial.
Well, now you literally took the words out of my mouth, because that was my next kind of topic I wanted to touch on before we finished off, is where are the products that are supporting these kids or the households? Because again, if we take South Africa as a isolated, situation, we have a lot of homes that are struggling to provide for the kids and their learning journeys. I mean, again, not coming home and there's no power. Like if you've traveled 2 hours to get home, you get there's no power, there's no lights. So what kind of products can we do to kind of help support these kids that maybe their parents aren't home, or too busy, whatever it is, they don't actually understand? Like, imagine a kid coming home, Mom, I'm struggling with this maths equation, and the mother's like, well, I've never done maths, I can't help you. So what kind of products can we do to help facilitate those kind of problems that plugs into everything that we've spoken about?
Yeah, and look, this is a real problem, right? The lady who works for us, she's never finished school. She dropped out at grade 9. She had a child, and now she works for us full time, and she has 2 children that are in school. So she gets home at like 4:35, But then, like you say, the power is off, but she still needs to cook for everyone. Where is the, not on the one hand, she's maybe not that well equipped to help them with homework and, help with the reinforced learning and stuff that the support that parents need to give at home. But secondly, she also doesn't really have time for that, right? Being a single parent and, all the things that happens around that. So it's really kind of, you look at that situation, you go, well, I can imagine people get stuck there, because it's like, how do you make progress out of that? And what we've now done is help them to get a tutor for the kids, like 2 afternoons a week, to just help them with their homework, right? But once again,
Is
the
this in
tutor isn't
person or
scalable.
online? Out of interest, sorry.
So this is in person.
Okay.
But how do you scale that? How do you, because I mean, they're just 2 kids out of thousands that live in Kaimandi around the corner here from us in Stellenbosch that are faced with exactly the same problem. And we need to build on this stuff and make sure the next generation is set up to go further than what we did. And one of the ways we do that is through education. So I think reinforced learning in that space is definitely key. The big problem is how do you pay for that? Like, if I build a startup and these people don't even necessarily know that they need a product like this, right? That's the first problem. The second one is they might do, but they typically don't have credit cards.
How do you get a subscription out of them? Yeah.
And then after that, like, they have so little disposable income, and then you turn your eyes to government and go, well, why doesn't government fund this? And that's really complicated. Not even a South African problem, just globally, it's really hard to get governments to fund these kind of things, at least when you start out. And then you go to NGOs and, maybe that's a way to do it. Like, get some NGO help in a specific area and start making an impact in that area and bring some of that results back and say, okay, now we can extend it to other areas. But I think that is such an important space. Even, supplementing the current education system we have, how do we help them with reinforced learning? How do we help them just get their homework done? Like,
exactly. I think I mean, time has flown today. We need to start wrapping it up. But I think what's interesting is there's clearly a demand and a gap in EdTech in South Africa and Africa. Now, we've just taken a South African example. Now, again, going to a talk that I went with Launch Africa, what's his name again? Zach George. Yeah, and he was talking about how we always think of these startups as, we can't go past the Limpopo River. And we've just kind of isolated so many opportunities and challenges that need to be solved that potentially could, turn into something just in our kind of, sphere. What about what's happening around the continent? And we know, talking about India, how many eyeballs are looking at Africa and waiting to see when they can come in, where are the opportunities, how can we tap in to a very, very young population? And I think that's something we haven't even touched on, is like, the amount of youth in this country that are starved for education and knowledge. There's massive opportunities and a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and I think a lot has to do with passionate people, leaning in here and giving back, and passionate people leading these organizations or the government spheres that actually are driving these things. Because I think that was key in India, right? They said, look, we understand how important this is going to be down the line. And literally, there's some indications that they wrap this to say, this is your key out of poverty. Like, how poor you are now, you can get out of it if you make an effort with STEM subjects and you work really hard. And people started believing it. And when they believed it, they made an effort with it. And then you see all of a sudden all of these developers coming out, all of these startups, all of these people getting massive jobs, high earning jobs globally. And a lot of that money is flowing back into India. So India is doing great. Like, they're on the rise.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things, if we think of our load shedding problems, please, can we get our kids through engineering and kind of get them helping to understand building infrastructure in this country? Definitely an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Anyways, Rene, we're running out of time. Amazing how quickly that went, but it's always great. And thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Bobby. All the best.
Cool, man. Cheers.
Yeah.